Let's get to what everyone's been talking about this week, the Brett Kavanaugh confirmation hearings. We had headlines earlier this week because we had allegations of sexual misconduct emerging from a second woman here in Colorado. And then we had a vote earlier as we taped here on Friday at noon, going from the committee to the full Senate probably next week with some caveats from a couple of Republicans, including Jeff Flake. Pat, I'm going to throw it to you. There is a lot to cover here. I'll take it's your choice of where you want to go, whether developments from Friday, what we saw in testimony on Thursday, the Colorado connection, your choice.
Well, even before the Rebecca Ramirez issue, is Rebecca? Teresa Ramirez. Deborah, sorry. Deborah Ramirez connection came out in the New Yorker last Sunday. This is hitting close to home for a lot of people. I have talked to many, many women over the last 2 weeks who are remembering incidents that happened to them, things they'd never really talked about, things that at the time they might not have thought rose to the level of a crime or anything they would admit to people. So this discussion and the topic is really raw for a lot of people. Talk about raw then. You've got the testimony on Thursday, which had the country spellbound. I mean, you watch the people on the planes all watching the testimony, and people are filtering it through their own experiences and their own ways they feel about things. It's impossible to really tell who won. What we have to remember is this is not a civil case where the judgment is going to be for or against one person. We're talking about whether or not someone is going to be basically put on the Supreme Court for life. This is not even running for president, where you can throw them out in 4 years, maybe. This is on for life, so it's a serious topic. And I think the fact that the American Bar Association late Thursday night reversed what they had said, they'd already came out with a glowing recommendation of Kavanaugh, but said, let's wait. Let's have that FBI investigation. And I think at this point, that is the very least we can do. Now, we don't know if that's what the Senate committee will have agreed on.
David, there's multiple angles this one, as we mentioned. Take your pick of which one you want to go for.
Well, I think Patty brings up an important point, because there's lots of women who can tell some kinds of stories of, being groped or worse things. And so it is and has been a widespread problem. That doesn't automatically mean that every woman who makes an accusation is always telling the truth, and that every man who's accused is automatically guilty. Ida Barnett Wells, the great journalist, wrote about this in regard to lynching back in the turn of the previous century, and said how in the South you have a white woman can make an accusation of an assault or a rape against a black man, never testifies under oath, and she's just automatically believed, and the black man then ends up murdered by a lynch mob. So we're supposed to have due process and a fair system where people can testify and be cross-examined as well. Senator Gardner did a good and responsible job on his side when he received an anonymous letter making allegations about Kavanaugh in 1998 that claimed that there were, that occurred in 98, claimed there were 4 witnesses, including the letter writer, although there were no names, no location other than Washington, D.C., nothing to go on really. But properly, he forwarded that to the bipartisan staff of the Senate Judiciary Committee, which looked into that matter, as they do on lots of things, not in public testimony, but in private hearings as much as they could investigate it. And of course, somebody presumably on the Democratic staff leaked that to NBC News, but there was nothing to back it up. Senator Bennett, who I think has normally been a good and responsible senator, didn't do that. When Deborah Ramirez came to him, instead of going to the committee staff, which could have investigated, he worked with other senators, keeping it under lids, and then the media to try and have it come out. And she repeatedly, through her lawyer, refused to give any statement under oath to the Senate Judiciary Committee to provide any substantiation. And of course, we know the New York Times had also been looking at that story, and they said they interviewed dozens of people and couldn't find any corroboration for what she said. So I think Senator Bennett did a disservice to the public with how he handled that.
Eric, there are a lot of folks dissecting every single part of this story, and I'll let them get into the details. For me, I looked at maybe some of the political ramifications of this. Regardless of where the vote goes, I think there's an energy out there on both sides of the aisle that is going to bleed down into even local races. Am I nuts?
No, you're not nuts. It's the only issue this week. It's the only thing people are talking about. It has riveted the country. I think somebody already used that word, and it's the apt word. I'll get to what you're talking about in a sec, Dominic. I think I ought to start. I mean, we're taping this, as you indicated, at noon, and literally this news is broken in the last 10 minutes. So by the time this airs, what I'm about to say might be completely wrong. But what I think went down literally in the last half hour before we taped is that a group of centrist senators, and that's a very small group these days, but Jeff Flake, who's a member of the Judiciary Committee, I'm presuming perhaps Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, perhaps Democrat Joe Manchin, also part of that, got together and basically forced a 1-week delay. It cleared the Senate, the committee moments ago on an 11-10 party line vote to be sent to the floor. But the understanding is that the floor will not act on this for up to a week while the FBI conducts a further investigation. And the way that Flake and Collins et al. Have of leveraging that is if the Senate tries to move before that, presumably they would be no votes. And obviously they need their votes, so that's the leverage that they have. Again, I could be totally wrong, but I think that there was a small band of middle ground senators who forced this. Now the question is, what can the FBI do in a week? The Democrats have seized on that as their talking point. FBI report, FBI investigation. The FBI doesn't really do findings of facts in these situations. They go talk to a bunch of people, and then they come back and say, Smith said this, this, and this, and Jones said this, this, and this. The Senate ultimately still needs to assess all that and be the finders of fact. I think the compromise entailed that they're not going to expand the scope beyond the charges currently on the table. To your question, bigger picture, we could talk forever about this. I'll try to be quick. I think this whole episode just sort of points to the unraveling, the slow but steady and seemingly irreversible, although God knows we hope it's reversed, unraveling of our political system. The way people just run to their camps, they pick sides depending on the outcome they want. That's not true of everyone. But when I look at the number of people, whether it's in my social media feed or wherever, on both sides of this, who say, I know, capital letters on no, I know he's guilty, or I know she's lying. It's not I believe, I think, I suspect. It's I know with the K-N-O-W in capital letters. There's just no room for nuance. There's no room for thought anymore. It's distressing stuff. It's been a week that sort of shakes people, and it's just underscored our tribalism, which is very concerning.
I would certainly agree that tribalism is at all-time high. I have a feeling that if one tribe said the sun rose in the east, the other tribe would be like, no, that it can't be true because the other tribe said that. Natasha, what was your takeaway from this week that is still developing as we tape?
And that's a key point. I think it's still developing, and having a takeaway at this point is really difficult. I spent a lot of time thinking about this, thinking about what angle I would want to take this time and a venue to speak about, to bring my voice into the chaos of voices that are related to this conversation right now. I'm not sure I'm going to do that, but what I do want to focus on right now is legacy. And as I was watching things yesterday and thinking about this and talking to friends and talking to people in the community, I kept on thinking about Anita Hill. I am not yet a teenager when she testifies in front of the committee. And the impact that had in my childhood at that point, you know, I learned a lot of things about what can happen in a workplace. I learned a lot about what I would have to change in my life if I wanted to not experience those things, and knew that I would also maybe not have a choice over whether I experience those things or not. So the legacy of those hearings and how that impacted me, let alone the rest of America, politically, you know, in our work environments, across the board in our own homes, I think is amplified by what has happened this week as well. And while it is too early to say what that legacy is, I think it is important for us to take a moment in the midst of all this chaos, to take some breaths and to think about that. Think about what we're saying to our families, think about what we're saying to our friends and our communities, but to our politicians as well, about what this means for us at this time.